Hi, I'm Sandra Burris with Keller Williams Realty. People often think about Texas and ranches and lots of space and fantasize about purchasing a farm and ranch property. Today we're going to discuss the differences in purchasing a farm and ranch property as opposed to a traditional property. Stay tuned. There are several things that we want to pay attention to when we're purchasing a farm and ranch property. When purchasing a farm and ranch property, there are several things that you might want to consider and the importance of evaluating a property that's quite different than a traditional home. First thing is, how do you do your due diligence for a farm and ranch property? Just like a traditional property, if there is a home on the farm and ranch property, you're going to have a traditional inspection done. You're going to check out the property, check out the windows, the electrical, the roof, the foundation, and so forth. But there's several other things that you might want to consider when you're looking at farm and ranch. Another thing to consider is the availability and the location of utilities. Often in farm and ranch properties, you have utilities run down the street, but not to the property. And that may be an additional cost you have to evaluate. Also, if you use a co-op, how do you get access to things like electricity? If you want gas, are you using propane? Is there water on the property, or will you need to drill a well? That's just a couple of things to take a look at. Another thing is the accessibility of the property. Is there a road to the property, or do you need to get an easement, which is approval from another property owner to access your property? These are not cookie cutters at all, and you have to look at it from all different aspects. You might have to get an environmental study done. If there is a well drilled on the property, you may want to have the water checked and make sure it's drinkable and that there is enough water to sustain the usage you'll need for your home or whatever you plan to do with the property. The other thing you may have to consider is a soil test. Depending on what you're wanting to do with the property will determine if you need to have that checked out as well. You want to review any deed restrictions on the property. And what that is perhaps no mobile homes on the property. Maybe there's no farm animals. You just want to make sure when you're looking at what do I want to do with this property, what are my goals, can I do that with this property considering deed restrictions. Another thing is mineral rights. Do mineral rights transfer with the property or do they stay with the previous owner? Is there an ag exemption on the property and are you going to be able to transfer that to you? Is there enough land associated with the property for you to keep the ag exemption? Some farm and ranch properties have leases on them. It may be an oil and gas lease. It may be a farm lease where somebody's mowing hay on it. You just need to check those things out too. You want to evaluate, especially if it's a large piece of property, is any or all of it in a floodplain? And if it is, will that impact the price of the property and your usability of the property? The second thing you really want to look at on a farm and ranch property is how do you finance it? Farm and ranch is really different than traditional home purchases because they're quite unique. You want a lender that's familiar with farm and ranch. Often you're going to have to put more money down and it may take longer and you may have a higher interest rate. There's a bit more risk for a lender associated with farm and ranch properties. The other thing is, can you finance things like drilling a well if you need to drill a well in the property to have water? Or can you finance in farm equipment or animals like cattle? That's another thing. Somebody that's experienced in farm and ranch lending will know the answers to those questions and how to structure it for you. Also, if there's any special programs. So it's important to find a lender with great experience. There's a few other unique things you need to consider with purchasing a farm and ranch property. There is a thing called rollback taxes. If the property you're considering is under an ag exemption and the property changes, such as it's a smaller piece off of a larger piece of property, are there any rollback taxes due? That's 3 years of rollback taxes if the property is too small or you're not able to use the agricultural exemption that was already on the property. That's something that you want to find out before you end up purchasing. Second of all, farm and ranch properties take longer to go to closing. Some of it's because you may have to get a new survey. Surveys are a little bit more difficult, actually quite a bit more difficult on a farm and ranch property, and you want to make sure that you get the survey in plenty of time to evaluate it before you move forward to closing. You don't want to go to closing and just have gotten the new survey, so it's important to get that ahead of time. As I mentioned before, one of the big things you want to consider is, what do you want to do with the property? Do you want to farm it? Do you want to have animals? Do you want to have bees on the property? Are you wanting it for a vacation home? Do you want hunting allowed on the property? All those things are important to ask yourself so that you find the right property for you. When you're purchasing farm and ranch, you want to make sure you know what you're buying. Are you buying mineral rights? What about water rights? What about, is it a wetland? What if there are endangered species on the property? Will any of that impact the usability of the property? Big questions. What conveys with the property? If there's bales of hay on that property, does that convey to you, or is the owner taking that? What about crops that are growing on the property, if any? Will the previous owner be able to harvest that and use that income? Or will you have that? Do any animals, or do you have any blinds for hunting? Anything like that can be transferred with the property or not, and you need to know that going in. There's a lot of information that you need to gather for a farm and ranch property because each and every one is unique, and it's important to find a realtor and a lender that's familiar with farm and ranch to help guide you through the process. Hope this information was helpful to you, and as always, like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know if you have any questions regarding farm and ranch properties in Texas.